Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Nickel, and welcome to another session of my Happiness Hour. The lady at the controls is Erin Randall. Say hello, Miss Erin.
Hello, Miss Erin.
She's so obedient. She is sitting probably under a blanket in Montana as I simmer here in Austin, and Jose is under a blanket of humidity in Houston. But Erin's going to keep us all on mute, and you can add any questions that you have for Jose in the chat. To see the latest list of upcoming presentations, check out my Instagram page at Cousin Linda and on my website, lindanickel.com. I post those classes, lineups, a little bit more description every Tuesday, mostly on my website. It's a little bit more, it's easier for me to put more information there. If you've missed last week's presentation, the President's photographer, David Valdez, was here, and he is now on YouTube, and he's so excited that he's on the YouTube channel. So if you missed that, go check out his presentation as well as some of the previous sessions. If you're enjoying these sessions, and I think a few of you are because you're coming back, and even better, you're inviting some of your friends, you know, please tag some of your friends, encourage them to come. All of these sessions are free. And, you know, my goal here has been from the very start is to help us all connect, inspire, and create. And one of the ways we can do that is to use the chat line. So if you haven't already, please add your Instagram, your website. Me being a person that loves travel, put in where you're from, because if you have a spare bedroom, I might show up and take advantage of that. So next week, Erin Randall, who's not only my trusty sidekick, but she's a certified agile and coactive coach, and she works with individuals and corporate clients that, you know, to focus on their professional goals. And a couple of months ago, she was here and she introduced us to what she calls powerful questions for creatives. And that, you know, she kind of tweaked it for us as photographers, but she's going to pick up that train of thought with several artists and photographers that are going to join her for her presentation. And I don't even really know who they are, so this is going to be a surprise for me too. But her presentation is called Coaching for Creatives. So I do hope that you come back. So tonight, I get to introduce you to Jose Madrigal. And I know I butchered that, Jose, but I did the best I could. Say it for us.
Madrigal.
Oh, I cannot roll the R's.
A little bit and make that L at the end just last forever.
I need some more practice and a little bit of tequila. Jose is a Houston-based macro photographer, and in my humble opinion, which is what counts right now, is he has mastered the art of photographing the tiny world of insects. And Jose is carving out a niche, and he is being recognized for his fascinating and his stunning images of these incredibly important contributors to everyone's food source. And you know, they're known as the pollinators. And in tonight's presentation, Pollinators, Magnified Macro Photography, Jose's going to share his tips and his techniques on capturing these tack-sharp focus on flying and fast-moving subjects in the garden. And so with that, I'm going to sit here and hang on to every word that you say, Jose, because macro is something that I really do enjoy, but I find it super challenging. And so, you know, we visited over the weekend, and I was just, we got off the phone or off the Zoom, and I thought, I can't wait till Wednesday. So thank you for coming. Yeah. Thank you for sharing what you know. And you guys, please, if you aren't already following him on Instagram, look him up. We'll pop up his handle again, because I think it's jmad_images. So correct. That's what I think it is. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Jose.
All right.
All yours.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Linda, for inviting me. I'm very excited to be doing this. I was hoping this year to be able to start doing some workshops, and obviously COVID happened and kind of changed plans. In fact, I had one scheduled that I was going to do in April at the Mercer Botanic Garden here in Houston. And like I said, that one ended up, it was already on the schedule. I just had not announced it yet. And just the day prior to announcing it, uh, some people that I knew that worked for the CDC told me what was about to happen. And so I decided it was wise to just go ahead and cancel it. So anyway, I was, like I said, I was looking forward to being able to do a little bit of teaching this year. So I feel like that this will be an opportunity for me to do some of that, to kind of get my feet wet, I guess, in a informal type of setting. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm not a super proficient Zoom person, so y'all have to forgive me if I'm a little bit lost from time to time. But anyway, yeah, so we're going to go through just an opening screen here. But what I want to talk about first, in talking with Linda yesterday, I kind of told her a little bit of my backstory. And so she suggested that I include that in I guess it was Sunday. I'm saying yesterday, but it was Sunday.
It's all blending. It just blends.
It just blends for sure, especially with my crazy schedule these days. So she said to share my backstory, and so here goes. Basically, I've been an artist most of my life. When I was a kid, I remember before I even started school, my brother was either in kindergarten or first grade, and brought home those. I don't know if you guys remember back in the 70s, depending on how old or young some of you guys are. Back in the 70s, and I'm sure later, they would send you home this magazine where you could order scholastic books or whatever. And I saw one in my brother's scholastic magazine for how to draw cartoons. And so I was probably 3 or 4 years old at the time, because I hadn't started school yet. And I just remember I asked my mom if I could order that one. And so they ordered it for me. And I just spent hours and hours and hours working on drawing. And by the time I started kindergarten, I was already drawing like full body figures, and I was like the only kid in the entire grade that was doing that. And I remember looking at other kids as they would draw people. They would draw a circle, for their head, and then sticks coming out where the ears should be, and then sticks coming out down here. And I would ask them, "Is that what people look like to you?" And I was always, my teachers were like, "Man, you really have an amazing talent." And so by the time I was in middle school, I was drawing to where it was photorealistic. But around that same time, I got into music, and I started playing the guitar, and that kind of took over as my artistic passion. With drawing, it was interesting. I felt like I drew exactly what I saw, but I didn't ever feel like I was expressing myself artistically. I remember having friends in middle school and high school that I thought were better artists than I was, even though I could draw technically better than they could, to where it looked more realistic. But I felt like that they were expressing themselves, and that's what I felt like finally started happening when I started doing music. And so I got into music. But I never went for it full time. I did get a college degree and have a backup career, but always had that in the back of my mind as something that I wanted to pursue. And so I pursued music a little bit on the side after I started working, but along the way I got into fitness, and ended up shifting gears in my early 30s and becoming a personal trainer. And my first job out of college was as a teacher. I worked as a teacher and a substance abuse counselor, so I'm jack of many trades here. But like I said, I became a personal trainer for quite a few years. Ended up opening my own gym, which I think really gave me a lot of business background that a lot of artists don't necessarily have. I think that's one of the things that I've found where a lot of artists struggle, is that they don't understand the business side of being an artist. They're so focused on their art and on not compromising anything, that they forget that that you have to make a living at this too. And if you can make a living doing what you love, that's the best thing in the world. And because I've done it as a personal trainer, And I got into photography about 5 years ago when I started traveling. I had reached a point with my gym business where it was at a good place. I felt like I had kind of achieved everything that I wanted to achieve with that, and started wanting to explore the world a little bit. Part of it was age as well, being in my mid 40s. I was kind of, like I said, wanting to see the world, see some of the things that I had missed over the previous 10, 15 years of building my business. And my wife noticed, that the pictures that I would take on my phone were just really, really good, that I just had the eye. And I said, well, I've been an artist most of my life, so I think that has helped. And so she surprised me one Christmas with a nice camera, the Sony A6000. It was a good entry level camera. And I remember just being immediately just in love with this format. I felt like I was starting. It was reigniting the interest in creating art, and it was something that I could do just kind of for fun, and being a photorealistic sketch artist as well. I like the idea of being able to capture things and seeing them exactly as they are. But interestingly enough, I started immediately wanting to play with like Photoshop and Lightroom and things like that, and learn how to get things right there. So anyway, about a year after that, my wife had said, you never take, she's an avid gardener, and she said, you never take the pictures of the flowers in my garden and the butterflies. What kind of lens do you need for that? And I told her, well, probably a good macro lens would be what I would need. And so she got me one for the next Christmas, and I said, all right, I'll take a few pictures for her of her butterflies in her garden, but then I'll go back to doing what I was really into, was, like I said, traveling and doing landscape photography and things like that. But I was instantly hooked when I started, when I put the macro lens on and started experience. This was in Christmas, so there wasn't really much to shoot outside, but I just immediately just started experimenting with everything I could find inside the house. I was taking even pictures of incandescent lights, and just playing with, seeing what it looked like up close and with different depths of field. And what I quickly realized is that for the first time, I was actually not just thinking about being an artist, but I was actually being an artist with the camera. I was actually just experimenting and creating. I had done a lot of online tutorials and workshops on how to do portraits, how to do landscapes. And when I did all that type of photography, I was always in my head. I was always thinking about the settings and making sure that everything was perfect and right. And when I started playing with macro, it was truly just playing. I was just, I wonder what'll happen if I try this. Let me try a little more light, or a little longer exposure. And just playing around in it, and it just completely changed my approach to photography. And the response was immediate. As I started posting some of my macro pictures on my Instagram account, I went from getting, maybe 10 or 15 likes to immediately getting, close to 100 likes, even with just a couple hundred followers. And so that told me pretty quickly that I was, people were reacting to what I was doing, and I knew that I was doing, I had kind of found my niche. And so then, when spring came around, then I just really started focusing on the outdoors, on the insects and things like that. And I, in addition to making macro my niche, I started making pollinators, Texas insects and Texas pollinators a niche as well. And I think that really helped, that I got actually very lucky. Within about 3 or 4 months of doing macro photography in April of 2018, the editor of Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine reached out to me and said that she really liked some of my images and they were doing a story on pollinators and wanted to see if they could use some of my photos. And so that, on top of my own passion, was just, the universe telling me, this is definitely what you need to be doing. And so I just 100% made it my focus with photography. And I pretty much stopped doing other types of photography unless I absolutely have to. If I need to take some portraits for something, I will. And obviously, if I'm traveling, of course, I'll take some landscape photos. But even when I'm traveling, I'm looking for what are the bugs that are there and things like that. So the story really got me, that was in the Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine, really got me thinking about vulnerable wildlife and pollinators in particular. And so it became more of a passion than just a pursuit to make pretty pictures. All right, and so I'm going to go ahead and get into, that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and start talking about, let me see if I can get this going to the next screen. There we go. About how to get the images. So obviously Linda said how to get tack-sharp images. You know, one of the things that I learned in doing portrait photography was to focus on the eyes. And I applied that with photographing animals and insects. I think most photographers that have done either wildlife or people understand that if the eyes are sharp, then everything else will look right. But if the eyes are off, even if everything else is sharp, the image is going to look off. So that would definitely be one of the tips, and I'll get a little bit more into those later. But as far as being able to get images of these insects, because they're usually quite skittish, they usually don't want to wait for you to approach. Some things to think about are the time of day. This photo right here is a photo that you need to get out early in the morning or after a rainstorm, but ideally early in the morning when the light is really good, and they're more docile first thing in the morning. So before the sun even comes up. I hate getting up early in the morning, so it was definitely a thing that I had to make myself do, but I was rewarded with, you know, a photo like this where you've got the insect covered in dewdrops, and it's just a really, really cool shot. There's also things that you can watch for in studying the subject. Mating, there's another early morning shot. This is a bee. Bees will, in early morning hours, will feed on tall grasses. They'll get the pollen and a little bit of nectar as well off of tall grasses, and that's basically about 6 inches off the ground on the grass. And this one I actually used flash with diffused flash, which I'll go into a little bit later. Mating behaviors. Okay, so this shot here is really probably one of my personal favorite flight shots. I love. I don't think I've personally seen another shot like this. I've seen some of the bee shots and the dragonfly shots, but a frontal bullseye shot of a butterfly, it's a pretty cool thing. Definitely got me excited. And the way that I did that was, you know, in talking about mating behaviors, this is a male, and he was trying to entice a female that was feeding on a flower. And so he's bouncing up and down behind her, just a few inches behind her, and was doing this for about 30 seconds to a minute. So it gave me a lot of time to run around to the front side of it, kind of line myself up, get my focus, locked it in. It was still required timing because it's jumping up and down and fluttering, but it's staying relatively in one area. So it made it a little easier to lock it in and snap the shot. And I happened to get a couple of shots, and this one is for sure my favorite, the way the wings are outstretched back. There's also, let's see, other mating behaviors. These dragonflies are actually mating in the air, and the male is the one that's in the front. People always think it's the one that's in the back, and the male is actually the one that's in the front. But this shot is a moment you really kind of have to spend all day out there in the field studying different insects to get to know when different ones do different things. And if you catch dragonflies, most of them don't mate in the air like this. There's a few species that do, but when they do, they kind of slow down while they're hooking up, and you get a few seconds to get your focus and nail the shot. And so I've actually gotten several shots like this, and it's not an easy thing to get by any chance, but like I said, it's a little bit easier if you wait for moments when they're mating. Other opportunities are when they're patrolling a territory, like this cicada killer right here. He was low to the ground, hovering just a few inches above the ground, hovering from side to side across this path. And so I laid down on the ground in front of it, and just tracked it side to side with my camera. And he wasn't going too far forward and back, so it was pretty easy to gain that focus and just snap off a few shots until I got one that I liked.
Jose, let me
Yeah.
interrupt real quick. There's a question that I want to, since we're real close to that last picture. Deborah wants to know, do you typically use a tripod? Because your description of that head-on male butterfly sounded like you didn't.
Yeah, no, I don't use a tripod. I shoot handheld. I like the freedom of being able to squat down, lay on the floor, run around to the other side of the flower. I just, to me, a tripod is good if you're wanting to kind of set up a scene first and then wait for something to happen in that scene. But my style is I prefer to just kind of wander through the woods or wander through a garden and just kind of see what grabs my interest, and then compose the scene right away, looking through the viewfinder, change my viewing angle and all of that. So I shoot handheld 100%. And okay, so let's see, patrolling the territory. This is a damselfly that, you know, it was on some tall grasses, and as I walked past, it jumped off, hovered for a second, jumped back onto the grass. And so I said, let me see if I can get it to do that on cue. So I backed up a little bit and got myself to the distance that I needed for the shot. And I had grabbed one of these branches of grass and I waved it towards it. And fortunately, it jumped off and just hovered there for a second and was able to get the shot. So these are little tricks. A lot of times when you look at these, and I know I did the same thing, so that's the first thing that I wanted to dispel, is don't believe that you have to be chasing them when they're in fast flight, flying around. That's really difficult to do. I've done a few shots like that, but 90% of my flight photos are when they're moving a little bit slower or hovering. And it just takes some time to find some of these moments. Like I said, when they're mating, when they're patrolling a territory, when they're approaching a nest, when they're visiting popular flowers. This is actually a bee fly. This is actually a fly rather than a bee that often gets confused as a bee, though. It's a bee mimic, and this is called the bomber fly. And what they'll do is they feed on flowers, nectar, and pollen, and then they'll jump up and hover right above the flower for about 2 or 3 seconds before they move on to another one. And so if you just track it, you know, you can line up the position that you want to be in to get the shot that you want, and try to get the shot. This is a leaf cutter bee, and leaf cutters will cut little circles out of sections of leaves or petals of flowers. This one took a little section of a petal of a flower and would fly off. They line their nests with these, and so they roll it up like a little taco between their legs and haul it off to line their nest. And I had seen a few shots on Instagram where people had managed to capture it with the leaf, but I'd never seen any with a flower. So I was pretty excited about getting one doing the flower like that. All right, I'll go a little bit more into techniques later. I want to get moving because I know we're already getting close to 30 minutes into this. Studying the scene, you know, is also very important if you want shots that you're not only are excited about the fact that you got the subject, but that it's also a pretty composition. So I always tell people to look through the viewfinder, ask yourself if the scene, you know, excites you. And that's what I do, you know, and if it doesn't, then I change my point of view, or I look at where the light's coming from. I look for things like leading lines. Is it a clean or a complementary background? I tend to like either a very minimal composition with just the subject and a flower maybe, or just the subject and a very clean background, or something pretty like some nice bokeh flowers in the background. Then you'll want to pre-focus, which I wrote there, select where to pre-focus. You'll want to pre-focus so that it's a little bit easier to get focus on the bird or the insect, whatever is going to be coming into that flower. And like I had mentioned in the previous one about studying the subject, if you know that certain ones are going to approach certain flowers, you'll start finding that there are certain flowers that are really popular, and you can kind of set your focus on that one flower. And then, like I said, it's much faster and quicker for your camera, or for you doing it manually. There's a couple different ways to do that. Next, again, here another, considering the background, this one, I had taken a few shots of bees on borage flowers, and I wasn't super happy with the darker background. And so I changed my angle to where the sun was coming in from behind and ended up with a really nice rim light on that and a really beautiful bokeh in the background as well. So like I said, just playing around with your angle. Don't just think about the insect itself, but think about what is around it so that it makes for a nice complete composition as opposed to just an insect. This one, it can be, this is a cleaner, more basic composition, a damselfly on a flower, and then with some of the flowers in the background creating, some really nice color. The other thing with studying the scene is that sometimes you can find something that you can start thinking in your head, ooh, this would make a good series of shots. I was at the Mercer Botanic Garden and saw that they had different colors of bluebonnets, and they had them red, white, and blue. And so that gave me the idea to get some shots like that. And so it took me, about an hour or two of waiting by some different flowers and finding just those right compositions and those right shots to where I felt like they worked together as a series. But this has been one of my most popular trio of shots. I've been started selling prints last year, and these three I sell as a square framed, and it's done really well for me. And all right, so let's move on to studying your equipment. As with any type of photography, with macro, you need to know the capabilities of your lenses and of your camera. Having lots of megapixels is a good thing to have if you're doing macro, because even with a macro lens, you're going to need to crop a lot of times. And so it's important to have lots of megapixels to where you can crop into the subject. Using a full frame camera, I prefer full frame. I'm going to adjust the light here just a little bit. It's kind of bright. I prefer full frame just because it does a better job with dynamic range. But some people prefer a crop sensor because it automatically crops in the image and they have to do a little less cropping later. And then just make the adjustments via how much the exposure time is or the lighting and things like that. So think about those things with whatever type of camera that you have, and adjust accordingly. Focusing speed, you'll want one that focuses fairly fast. I know some photographers like to only use manual focus. I use a mix of manual focus and autofocus. It just depends on the subject, and I'll get more into that a little bit later as to when and why. But know the minimum focusing distance as well of your cameras, because that's going to help you to kind of line yourself up where you need to be in advance. When let's see, back button focus, if I'm using autofocus, I'll set one of the back buttons to be the lock focus so that I don't accidentally click when I don't want to. Let's move on here now to the equipment that I use for my flight shots. So I have a Sony A7R III, and that's this camera here. And to me, that's the perfect camera for the type of photography that I do. I've had people ask me before for a recommendation on what camera, and I always say, well, what type of photography are you wanting to do? What type of pictures are you wanting to take? And because I use a camera with 43 megapixels, but that may not necessarily be what you need, or you may not need one that focuses quite as fast. If you're doing portraits, you gonna want a slightly different camera. And same thing with lenses. The lenses are gonna matter, depending on what type of photography you're wanting. So with my flight shots, I typically am shooting with this lens, the 100 to 400 millimeter, and I've got a 1.4 teleconverter attached to it. So that I'm shooting at 560 millimeters most of the time. And my focusing distance is 3 feet. And so I really get zoomed in. This shot right here is barely cropped. I was about 3.5, 4 feet away from the dragonfly when I captured this shot. And I use natural light most of the time. Although I do occasionally use a flash. And this year I also started using strobes, a little bit just for fun. This shot right here is backlit with the sun and then a strobe on the front. And that's a fun bullseye shot on a honeybee there. My settings for flight shots, I typically I'm typically shooting about F10, but I'll range anywhere between about F9 and F13. Because I'm shooting at fast moving insects, you need to keep your shutter speed fairly fast also. So I'm typically at 1/1600th of a second because I've found that gives me the most pin sharp images. And so that's part of what I have to factor in when I'm choosing my aperture. Using it at F10, it gives me the best trade-off of sharpness and of depth of field, and while letting in enough light for those faster shutter speeds. I set the ISO to auto and then adjust the exposure compensation depending on the background. If it's a dark background, I'll adjust to go down. Obviously, if it's bright in the background, I'll adjust it up a little bit to make sure that the subject is what's in focus and not the background. I use selective spot autofocus primarily, and occasionally I'll do manual focus like this one here. If any of you have ever seen skipper butterflies, they move really fast, and I really thought that would be one of the more impossible ones to photograph. Just happened to run into this one out at the Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge, and I noticed that there was two or three of them maybe, that were feeding on this series of flowers, and they keep going back and forth, and they were like doing a cycle. They'd hit one and then the next and the next and go back through about 12, 15 flowers and then come back. And so when I realized that pattern, I focused in on the first one, and because of how fast they moved, I knew that the autofocus wasn't going to work. So I used manual focus on that one to kind of focus in on the flower, and then just a little adjusted from there, and was able to nail several shots like that of the skipper butterfly. This one right here, though, is an example of selective spot autofocus. With honeybees, one of the behaviors that you can find from them, especially early in the morning, I've noticed that they tend to go for more pollen early in the morning than for nectar. And when they get covered in pollen, like this guy is here, or girl, actually, they'll pop up off of the flower and hover above it and kind of clean themselves off a little bit. And when they do that, you usually get, a good 2-3 seconds to line up the shot. And with the selective spot, you just basically got to center it right in there, lock your focus, and snap. Typically, I'll do continuous shooting as well, because even if you get that focus just right and click, it might not be right perfectly on the eyes. It might be a little bit back on the neck or somewhere else. So I'll typically run about 2 or 3 or even up to 4 shots if the subject stays in place long enough. This shot also right here, and this is one of the reasons why I prefer autofocus over manual focus. With manual focus, you kind of got to think about your scene first, and with autofocus, you can kind of think a little bit more about the subject, kind of be wandering around, and if you see something happening, you can kind of go for that. With these guys, I was tracking one of them that they were jockeying with each other. The males will joust and kind of get into little territorial disputes. And this is a pretty cool shot that I managed to get 2 dragonflies in focus on the same shot, but I was only focused on one. It was just kind of a lucky moment. But no matter what, always pay attention to your point of view. I dropped down, squatted down to get the right angle with the background that I wanted. Wait for them to pause or hover. Those kind of things can make a difference. If you're tracking like I was these guys, turn off your image stabilization that's on the lens. That will try to prevent you from moving, essentially. And so turn off image stabilization if you're tracking insects that are moving around. Next. Here we go. This one as well was a bit of a slow mover. Usually leaf cutter bees move really fast, but this one in particular I noticed was just kind of hovering around slowly from flower to flower. And so I was able to line up this shot and kind of wait for it to be in the right spot where there was a pretty flower behind it. So it made for a really nice composition. It really pops with the insect being perfectly sharp in front of that, that blurry flower back there. All right, next, my equipment for macro. I showed you my camera earlier. I've got my 90 millimeter lens on here. It's a Sony 90 millimeter lens, and I've also got this Nisi close-up lens attachment. This kind of doubles the magnification. It just threads on there like that. You have to use a step-up filter or a step-up ring rather to attach it, but it goes on really nicely. I use a Godox flash right on the top with a bouncer, just a standard bounce deal like that attaches to the flash. And then for my diffuser, it's a reverse conical diffuser that attaches right onto the end of the lens. And so having the step up filters was something I already had. And when I got the Nisi lens, so it goes on there looking like this, and then the light points here, and then you've got the bouncer, so it just kind of contains all the light right there, and it just kind of surrounds and shrouds the subject, so you get really nice, soft, even light all around the subject, and you get a lot of detail. You can keep your ISO really low. And I made that diffuser myself. There's plenty of instructions that you can find online. I don't have instructions. I would offer them if I did, but I can refer you guys to some people, and I'll do that at the end. Some people that can help you out with that. I also use a 50 millimeter. I forgot to set that out here, so I'm not going to bother, but I also have a 50 millimeter macro lens. That's what I used for this shot here. As you can tell, it's got more of that wider angle look. It allows you to get more of the subject in focus, but then it also has kind of that dramatic effect that wider angle lenses have, where whatever's in focus looks a little bit enlarged or exaggerated. And so it kind of gives a bit of a cartoonish look, which is, if you like it, I like it. So I like using that, but I use the 90 more often just because it's a little bit more of a versatile lens. Gives me a lot more options of shooting. I can use it for flight and but if I've got a still subject like that, I'll a lot of times switch up to the 50 just to get a different look. This one was also shot with the 50 millimeter. And as far as my settings for macro, I'm typically also here at about f10. F10 I've found with my lenses, and you kind of have to find the sweet spot for each lens. But I've found that right around f10 seems to be the sharpest. And then, like I said, it also gives me that good depth of field and allows me to get in enough light to where I don't have to adjust too many other things to get the exposure right. But I'll go as high as f16 if I want to get a little bit more depth of field, and I'll go down as low as f9, but usually much lower than that. I've occasionally shot at wide open, but you get a softer look rather than a real sharp look, which is fine for human portraits, but for insects you want sharp images. Then my shutter speed is typically about 1/100 to 1/250th. It's usually right at 1/200. My ISO is usually at about 250, but you see the range there anywhere from 100 to 400. I'll set my flash to TTL just so that I don't have to think as much about that, but I will use compensation on that. I'll bring it down a little bit if I feel like that the images are coming through a little bit too bright or not quite bright enough. I'll adjust that. And so typically with macro, I prefer shooting in manual focus so that I can make sure that I'm getting it exactly sharp where I want it. But as I approach the subject, I'll start in autofocus and focus on the head and just move in closer and closer and just keep taking a few shots as I move in closer like that. And then once I know the subject isn't going to move away from me and isn't going to fly off, then I'll go ahead and switch into manual focus and try to really get the good money shots like that up close in manual focus, making sure that the lens is set to a 1:1 magnification. As well here, set manual focus here on this shot. I don't have the specific settings, but this was a fun subject that really let me get a lot of shots. I probably got about 30 or 40 shots of this one insect. I got it would fly off, catch a a poor other insect out of the air, bring it back and eat it right in front of me. And so I got a few pictures of it eating as well. Here's a leaf cutter bee. I already talked a little bit about my technique, so I won't go too much more on that, just kind of show you a couple of pictures here. This was captured actually in the late afternoon, but sometimes, you know, how I said you can find them in the morning, sometimes you'll find them in the late afternoon as it's getting towards dusk. You'll find them starting to settle in for the night, and certain bees will settle in on flowers. And that's what this one was doing. It was basically just resting like it was getting ready to go to sleep in the late evening. This one was middle of the afternoon, but I really like the drama of this shot. This shot was captured from above. And yes, that's actually, I actually had to dial back the saturation a little bit because it's such an intense red that it was a bit overwhelming. This particular species, called the carmine skimmer, is just a really intense red dragonfly. And what I did with this was with dragonflies, it really helps if you approach straight on as opposed to from the side. If you approach from the side, they notice your movement a lot more easily and they'll take off on you. So like I said, if I approached this head on, and it allowed me to approach, and you'll find that a lot of times they're still going to be pretty skittish, but with a little bit of determination. A lot of times also, if you move in only about half as close as you're going to get, and then just stay there for a little while and then move in a little bit closer, or if they've flown away, they'll a lot of times come back to you or allow you to approach closer next time, and each time get a little bit closer in. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about my post-processing. It's very important, and I see a lot of times with photographers that do insect photography that they don't necessarily spend much time doing post-processing. And I think it's a very important part of the process. Ansel Adams had a quote: "You don't take a photograph, you make a photograph." He would spend a lot of time in the darkroom. And I think you got to spend, you know, a similar amount of time in software like Lightroom. And I use software called Topaz Denoise, which you can see the dramatic difference. The one on the left is the before. This was shot at ISO 5000, and then the after just really sharpened it up. And then my process is typically to first make sure that everything's pretty good with the exposure in Lightroom, export it to a denoise or a sharpening app. You can do noise reduction and sharpening within Lightroom, but I feel like Topaz does a little bit better, a little bit more intelligently with that. So I've continued using that. And then I'll bring it back in though. And then if there's some particular areas that I want to enhance just a little bit more, I'll do that to give the shot the kind of mood and the kind of feeling that I want. If you're trying to create art, you know, you have to, art is about a feeling, and people have to feel something from the image. And so to me, I don't see anything wrong with, you know, some people are real purists. They don't want to do anything to the image. If you capture something that makes you feel something just as it is, then so be it, you know, present it that way. I typically though like to spend a little bit of time processing an image and kind of getting it to really feel the way that I feel it, and put my own touches on it. I did also want to note there that for exporting to Instagram, this is a question that I get a lot of times, of how I get, you know, the images to be really sharp resolution on Instagram. And so I included that as well, to always set the image to 1080 pixels wide. The other settings seem to be less important. Well, you want to use sRGB as your color space, only because you don't need any additional colors for a phone. But 1080 pixels on the width is usually going to give you really, really sharp results. If you have the ability to export your images and set that, then make sure you set it like that so that your images look great when you post them on social media. And so the last final thoughts here that I'll give, because I know I've been going for a little while. make sure that you find your niche. Like I said early on, that I found my niche. I always like the quote, when you're good at something, you tell others. When you're great at something, others tell you. And this is not to say that that if you're not immediately getting amazing feedback that it's not your niche. It just means, though, listen. And if you're finding that certain of your images people are really responding to and others they're not, then really focus on that energy. Because I found that, and I'd heard this from another professional photographer saying that finding your niche is super important if you want to get published, because magazines, the editors don't look for a general photographer and ask them, hey, by the way, can you shoot pictures of bees? If they want a picture of a bee, they say, oh, I wonder who's the bee photographer. And of course they're going to find me, because that's what I do. I do bees and pollinators. And so find your niche if you're wanting to make any kind of career out of this, if you're wanting to get published, if you're wanting to sell prints, find your niche and focus on that. But most importantly, make art and have fun. Don't get lost in the technical aspects. I remember when I first started doing the photography, I would have other artists try to tell me, if you have you thought about doing this or this other to the image, to get, because early on I probably wasn't I wasn't using the diffuser, and so I was getting harsh shadows and contrast wasn't good. But I was happy with a lot of the images that I was producing. And I remember answering people that, if I make the adjustments that you want, then it becomes your image rather than mine. And I always wanted to create my own art, even if it wasn't perfect, or even if it wasn't for everybody. So do what you love and make your art, and but then focus in on the ones that people seem to be responding to, and that'll kind of guide you in the path that you need to be on. I'll say real quickly, if you want to, I have prints available on my website, pollinatorportraits.com. I'm also an affiliate with Topaz, and so if you're interested, I do have a promo code that I can give you. Just email me at jose@pollinatorportraits.com, because they don't want me to publish it. But I can give you a promo code where you can get a discount. You can try their software for 30 days, and it's no charge for 30 days. And if you don't like it, it's no big deal. But pretty much everybody that has tried it has ended up saying, wow, this is really, really great software. It does some really great stuff. And then also that Nisi close-up lens, just in the last 24 hours, which I just got it a couple of months ago, and I only started experimenting with it recently because of this whole COVID situation. I didn't get to play with it very much until a couple of weeks ago, but I instantly fell in love with it. I had been using a different lens before, which I won't knock them, because I'm not about that, but I really love this one. It's super sharp. It doesn't affect my ability to focus like the previous one did. And the previous one would create a bit of a halo. And so this one I really like a lot. And so if you're interested in this lens, I also have I created in the last 24 hours an affiliate deal with them, but you'll need to email me on that. If you're interested in it, I can get you 10% off on the price of the close-up kit. It's normally $139, and so like I said, I can help you a little bit on that. So let me know if you're interested in that. All right, and with that, I'm done with my presentation. Hopefully I covered, I know I've gone a long time, but I had a lot of stuff that I wanted to cover, but I'd love to answer some questions. So should I hit stop share now, or what should I do?
Hit stop share.
All right.
And then I'm going to hit you with a couple of questions. And if you guys have any more, this is the time to put them into the chat line. So you've answered a lot of the questions that were early on about do you ever autofocus? And it seems like, yes, sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. So that was one of the questions. So if that's not an accurate repeat, just correct me.
Yeah, but, I'll say real quickly, I do get asked that question a lot, and it's interesting. I've never had a publisher or a person who buys the photo ask me if I shot it in manual. It seems to be something that people who are like real techno geeks or whatever, they obsess with it. It always has to be in manual, or it has to be this or that and the other. And to me, it's about getting the shot, and I just want to get the shot, and I want it to be fun, And so, like I said, I think that if you focus on technical aspects, there's a lot of people that have really perfect crap out there, and I'd rather have images that may not be perfect, but I'm excited about, and other people that see them get excited about, and that's my goal with my photography.
So Jamie Wagner, it goes back to and this was my fault. I should have brought this in front of you right after that image, but she asked, "Are you at ground level for the bee in the grass?" But was that a dragonfly in the grass? Maybe
so there was a bee in the grass and a damselfly in the grass, and so for the bee, yeah, I was laying on the ground, got pretty wet because it was early in the morning.
Early morning.
Yeah, and so yeah, but I was laying on the ground and just focusing in on that bee, and like I said, I was using the diffuser for that, so I was really up close within just a few inches of it. The damselfly, I squatted down, so I was fairly low at ground level, but that one was shot with the telephoto lens from about 3 or 4 feet away.
Okay, she's got another question, and this is Jamie. I've been told that dragonflies are predators, so you need to try to keep back from them so that they don't bolt. Do you find that to be the case?
They're definitely for sure they're predators, and they go after other insects. I've actually got pictures of them eating other dragonflies, and so they'll eat just about anything that they can. But they're usually quite skittish. They're usually going to try to get away from you. But that was where I said, that if you approach straightforward from the front, it makes it a little bit easier, and approach really slowly. I've found that with some, even like getting down on my knees and crawling on my knees towards it seemed to make it less scared of me than if I'm approaching, walking, standing up. So try adjusting your approach like that, and you definitely get your bumps and bruises doing this type of photography.
So, and I don't know if it's Mika or Micah, but her question is, in the morning, what time do you find is the best to shoot in Houston, since that's where you are?
So
how early is too early, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so like for those shots, if you want the dewdrops on the insect, you're going to want to get up just before sunrise, or get out just before sunrise, I should say. And so you'll have a little bit of morning light already to be able to find insects and stuff like that. But try to do it before the sun actually starts coming up. They're going to be moving a little bit more slowly. Most of my flying bee photos have been between about 7 and 9 a.m. The other thing about them, collecting pollen at those hours, they just move a little bit more slowly. I think it's a little bit cooler, and so they're not moving as fast as they move in the afternoon. So definitely those are early morning hours. Now, most of my dragonfly shots, though, in flight are in the afternoon. So it's really just a matter of just kind of experimenting with different insects and depending on what you're trying to do.
Okay. So I like this username. Toad the Great is asking, do you ever focus stack?
I'm sorry, ask that again. You cut out.
Do you ever do focus stacking?
I've done it once or twice early on, just because when I first started doing macro, I wanted to experiment with all types of macro, but I found that it started turning me back into what I had been with landscape and portrait photography, which was too technical and too in my head instead of just being creative and having fun. I found that I was just spending way more time with getting the stacks created and making sure that everything was perfect in there. And like I said, I got away from pursuing it artistically. And so I decided to focus on just doing single shots. So everything that I showed tonight is a single shot. Yeah. And as far as what I expect to be doing, at least for the next year, is going to be mostly single shot photography. I admire stack photography. When I've seen, like there was a guy that did a tour through museums of all these dead bugs. I can't remember the guy's name, but I have the book, but It's just incredible when he would take like several thousand images and stack them all, and just the incredible amount of detail and all of that. I love looking at it, but it's just, like I said, it's not how I create and how I feel creative.
So Kathy Chassie is asking, do you use the Nisi filter with a 90mm macro lens?
Yes. Yeah, that's how it is on here. It's the, I'll take the hood back off there. So you can see it's the 90mm Sony macro lens, and it's got the Nisi on there. It's got a couple of step up rings. The Nisi comes with a couple of step down rings. And then I had a step up ring already for my diffuser that I had already had, and it needed that because it goes, I think it's a 62mm on the end of the Sony, and then it's a 77mm. Although I hear that when I was talking to them yesterday about setting up the affiliate account with them, they said that they're going to be making a 58mm, which is going to be smaller, and I think it might have already been released over in Asia, but it just hasn't been released here in the US yet.
So Angie Purcell is asking, do you use more often the Nisi lens or the Sony macro?
It just really depends on the subject and what I'm after. If I want a real close-up shot of the face, then I'm definitely going to use the filter on there. If I just want, because that zooms it in, it magnifies, doubles the magnification. But that's too close if I want the entire insect on some insects. If it's a large dragonfly and its wings are outstretched, I'm not going to get the whole dragonfly in the shot that way. So I will remove the filter and just shoot with the 90mm.
Okay.
So. I see the question, have I used Raynox? And that was the one that I was going to say that I've tried before. It's a smaller lens. It's about half the diameter. And that was what I found with it, is that it made it more difficult to focus, and that it created like a halo on the, like a vignette, almost a really dark vignette on the outer edge of the image. And so I would always have to crop in. And with this, I don't get that at all. And I feel like that, like I said, it doesn't really affect my focusing one bit, whether it's an autofocus or manual focus. I just feel like it's really easy to focus with, and just as sharp. I think the Raynox is equally sharp. I don't want to knock it for quality. The quality of the image it produces is really good, but I think this Nisi is just a little bit easier to deal with for the other respects.
Okay, so what about, why do you use such a long focal distances to take fly shots?
Well, because particularly when I'm doing flight shots, I want to be able to track from either from as close as 3 feet to as far as 12 feet away from me. A lot of it depends on the size of the subject. If it's a really small subject, I'm not going to be able to focus from that far away. But it also allows me to shoot like that leafcutter bee. It was in a patch of flowers, and instead of having to trample into those flowers, I was able to lay down on the ground about a foot or two away and kind of just track it as it was flying through the flowers. And so I'm able to disturb less the area that I'm photographing in, and that's important to me too. As if I care about these critters that I'm shooting, I have to take them into consideration as well, and what what they're going through.
Okay, so now we're going to add some fashion to the element here. So Casey Holzman, and I cannot remember what her first name is. She says, I've heard someone say not to wear black as that reads as a predator. Do you find that true? So we want to know, what should we be? What color will attract them to us?
I wear camo. Yeah, seriously, I want to blend in as much as possible. And but I wear like it's a long sleeve fishing shirt. So it's like a real thin, stretchy material that blocks the sun. So I don't have to use a lot of, I don't like to use a lot of bug sprays and things like that. I just put a little bit on my face and a little bit on the backs of my hands. But If I don't have to put it on my arms, I don't have to put it on. So I wear long pants as well. And so I'm out there in 100-degree weather in long sleeves and long pants. But to me, it's worth it to try to help protect the environment. And then also, like I said, to be as stealthy as possible.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. But I want to ask you, and I want you to make me feel good about my own shooting. What is your throwaway rate? When you go out and you're after a bee or whatever you're shooting, please tell me you throw thousands away like I do.
Yeah.
Lie to me. But straight to the face, lie to me.
So, it's interesting. I probably keep a lot of shots that I don't end up posting on Instagram because I figure I can use them some other way. I want to have a catalog of shots. If a publisher wants to use something, I want to have a catalog of shots with different things. But as far as what I consider a keeper shot, it definitely, one of the most important skills that you can have as a photographer when you're doing wildlife photography is to be able to cull, to be able to know which of your shots are good and which ones are great. And so when I say throw away, there are a lot of shots that I throw away that I think that a lot of other people would think is a good photo. But to me, if it's not one that I would feel proud to show on Instagram compared to other images that I've done, because it's got to be nailed on the eyes. If it's a flight photo, I'll see some, where people post them, and I did that too early on when I first started capturing them in flight. I was just excited that I had even gotten it in flight. But it's like once you get to a certain level, then you kind of want to maintain that level. And so I throw away a lot of photos now that I think probably a year ago, or actually probably closer to 2 years ago, I would have thought were really good. Last year, I was spending probably about 32 hours every weekend out in the field. Because I would get up before sunrise, spend the entire day from sunup till sundown, and then processing images, and then several hours during the week. So I was spending, like Aaron had said earlier about you have a full-time job, but you end up putting more time into your passion. That was me. I was spending definitely more hours at photography than I was the other. And like I said, it just I really feel like I mastered the flight stuff last year. And like I said, once I got to a point where I had created some shots that blew me away, is like I made a decision. I don't want to post anything that doesn't blow me away. And so I just, and then I also, as I started selling photos last year, I also started thinking about that. Is this something that people would buy and put on their wall? And so, yeah, it's kind of a tricky question, because like I said, I keep a lot of throwaways, but like I said, only because it's not an angle that I would post, or a composition that I would post, but it might be something that I might use for something else.
Jose, this was a thrill for me. I know it's a thrill, and I've been working on my yard, and so I've been able to draw in a few pollinators. So I was out playing this morning, and I'm thinking, hurry up, let it be 7:30 so that I can get his tips. So I'm going to try again tomorrow. With that, I'm going to say thank you for coming on. I know that you had put a lot of effort into your presentation, and I'm thrilled that you came and shared. And I know that there are a couple of people here that have sent me personal messages going, I can't wait for Jose. So this was just such a treat. And I so appreciate your time, because that's just a gift to all of us. So
thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for listening. And like I said, just shoot me an email. Yes. I'm even though I'm plugging this stuff, I'm not a salesman. I just, hey, if you're interested, I can save you a little bit of money on it. Great. But if you just want to ask me a question, I think Linda will tell you, and anybody that's on here that has ever asked me a question on Instagram, I'm an open book. I'm always happy to answer questions. Yes. And you don't need to pay me to answer a question for you. Okay.
And that's why it's awesome that you're coming on and just doing this. So that's what this for me, that's what these presentations are all about, is really sharing. And then you've inspired us. So you guys go create. Please tag me. You can tag Jose too, but tag me. I'm curious to see what you learned and what you're applying to your own photography. So
Yeah, tag me.
yeah, tag him too. So
Mad images.
yes, at jmad_images. And so next week, Erin Randall is going to be back. And if you watched her first session, Powerful Questions for Creatives, I was in the hot seat and I did not like it. But she is coming back because so many people sent me messages saying, she really made me think. And I said, that's what I hated about it. I didn't want to think, I just wanted to take photos. But there is value in what she has to say. And I think it's made a difference for several people to listen to what she's making you think. And so next week, Coaching for Creatives with Erin Randall. Come back, 7:30, same time. Bring a friend. We really appreciate you guys spreading the word. And with that, Erin, let's say good night.
Good night.
Good night. Okay.